For 70 years, she wore the crown in public, but ruled in private. Beneath palaces, ceremonies, and perfectly staged photographs lies a room almost no royal is allowed to enter. The true royal vault. Not the one seen in documentaries. The other one. And inside that chamber, behind inventories even monarchs don't fully read, sat a drawer sealed personally by Elizabeth. No title, no record, no heir assigned. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. The monarchy has always understood the power of visibility. What the public sees is carefully chosen, carefully timed, carefully explained. But survival does not depend on what is displayed. It depends on what is contained. Deep beneath official records exists a second structure of authority, the private holdings of the sovereign. Not state property, not ceremonial heritage, personal control. Within that space, rank dissolves. Princes wait. Heirs wait. Even the future king waits for permission that may never come. Entry was never decided by lineage. It was decided by trust. A monarch alone determines who understands the weight of silence, and Elizabeth guarded that privilege fiercely. On nights when the nation slept and the palace corridors settled into stillness, she walked past the rooms filled with inherited history and continued further down. She did not bring audiences. She did not bring family. Only keys, and sometimes a single envelope or small case carried without announcement. Staff learned to notice patterns without asking questions. Access logs appeared during the moments when the royal household strained under pressure. Engagements collapsing, marriages unraveling, grief turning public. After the official response had been prepared upstairs, she went below. Always alone. Always unrecorded beyond the mechanical mark of entry and exit. The monarchy would address the world in statements, but first she addressed something buried in the vault. The drawer itself did not come from ancestors. It was installed decades after coronation, added quietly into a chamber already filled with centuries. Not a restoration, not a replacement, an insertion. That difference mattered, because inherited objects carry obligation, but created spaces carry intention. And intention suggested preparation. Archivists who catalogued crowns and gemstones were never permitted to include it in official registries. They signed documents more binding than employment contracts, agreements that extended beyond service, beyond retirement, beyond death. They were not protecting jewels. They were protecting awareness. Even transition briefings prepared for the next reign never mentioned its existence, leaving a deliberate absence inside the monarchy's most important transfer of knowledge. Trusted aides came to understand that the sovereign distinguished between what the crown owned and what she personally guarded. The phrase she used, private sovereign storage, appeared nowhere else in protocol. It existed only in confidential instructions, a classification belonging not to the institution, but to the woman wearing it. Over time, silence around the drawer became tradition itself, not questioned, not acknowledged, simply obeyed. And yet, secrecy inside a family built on continuity carries a cost. Because a secret that survives decades is rarely about objects. It is about a decision waiting for its consequences. But a hidden drawer is meaningless without a reason to hide it. And the first clues appeared during the year the monarchy almost fractured. The drawer was sealed during a year the palace later called difficult. But privately, staff used a different word. Dangerous. Something had entered the royal orbit that could not be undone, and Elizabeth responded not publicly, but silently. No statement. No confrontation. Instead, she walked into the vault and locked away objects no sovereign had ever archived before. Not jewels, not documents, something personal enough to threaten the institution itself. The change began slowly, almost politely, the way royal crises often begin, with denials spoken calmly and schedules that continued as though continuity alone could erase consequence. Yet behind the carefully maintained rhythm of appearances, the household tightened. Conversations shortened when doors opened. Meetings were rearranged at the last moment, and invitations were delivered not through offices, but by hand. One by one, senior members of the family were asked to come alone, not as a unit, not as a council, but as individuals facing a monarch who already knew more than she intended to say. No minutes were recorded, not because secrecy was unusual, but because this silence was deliberate. Each person entered thinking they were attending discussion. Each left understanding they had been given a boundary. What passed between them never surfaced publicly, yet its effects did. Public smiles grew practiced, statements grew precise, and the monarchy's language shifted from confidence to containment. During this period, a courier arrived without prior notice. Not a uniformed official, not a member of staff, but someone whose authority came directly from her instruction. The package bypassed every traditional layer of security. It was not inspected, not catalogued, and not handed to aides. It went directly into the Queen's possession. Witnesses later recalled the unusual care taken when she opened it. Gloves were requested, not the kind used for diamonds, but those reserved for fragile relics, items that carried history rather than value. Within days, legal advisors quietly revised inheritance classifications. The distinction had always existed in theory: crown property belonging to the institution, private property belonging to the sovereign. But now a third understanding emerged: personal monarchy property. Not hers as a woman, not the state's as an entity. Something held in trust for stability itself. The adjustment appeared technical, yet it redrew emotional borders inside the family. Some things would pass down the line. Others would pass only to understanding. And that is when the drawer became more than storage. It became a decision made physical, not an archive of wealth, but an archive of responsibility. The monarch was not preserving objects. She was containing impact, because whatever had occurred that year could not be erased, only managed. Not politically, emotionally. The institution could survive scandal. It could survive criticism, but it could not survive uncontrolled truth inside its own walls. So she separated history into two categories: what the crown must endure publicly and what she alone would carry privately. The drawer marked the boundary between those worlds, a quiet admission that sometimes leadership is not guiding events forward, but preventing them from spreading. Because what she locked away wasn't valuable for its worth. It was dangerous for its meaning. When the inventory leak surfaced years later, historians expected lost diamonds or abdication letters. Instead, descriptions appeared that made archivists stop reading aloud. The contents didn't match royal tradition. They didn't match protocol. And they certainly didn't match Elizabeth's public personality. These were not symbols of power. They were symbols of memory. And memory, in a monarchy built on permanence, can be more dangerous than rebellion. The first entry was not grand, not ceremonial, just paper, thin, worn, folded too many times for something meant to be preserved. Handwritten correspondence, but absent from every official archive index. The monarchy records everything: engagements, condolences, political exchanges, even polite disagreements. Yet these letters had never existed in record form. They were written in a tone stripped of formality, addressed without titles, and signed without rank. They belonged to a woman, not a sovereign. That alone made them destabilizing. Then came the jewel, or rather, what remained of one. A recognized piece, once listed among formal holdings but altered. A stone removed, the setting changed, its registry quietly updated decades ago with no explanation. Not stolen, not lost, intentionally transformed. Someone had chosen meaning over tradition, and the Queen had preserved the altered version rather than restoring it. A monarchy built on continuity rarely tolerates change in its symbols, unless the change itself carries a message meant for only a few. The photograph unsettled archivists more than the jewel. It should have existed publicly. Chronology demanded it. Yet the official family timeline skipped that moment entirely. Here it was, carefully stored, showing a gathering history pretended never occurred. No scandal attached, no public embarrassment, simply absence. The kind of absence created not by shame, but by protection. Beneath it lay a legal instruction, prepared with full authority yet never activated. Signed by witnesses, sealed by lawyers, but missing the final execution mark that would have transformed intention into reality. The document suggested a decision Elizabeth considered and then refused to finalize. Not a mistake. A hesitation preserved. She had wanted future readers to know the choice had existed. More troubling was a small object connected to a child. One no lineage chart acknowledged. Not proof of inheritance, not proof of status, simply proof of closeness. Something kept not because it granted legitimacy, but because it carried attachment. Monarchies recognize heirs. They rarely preserve private affection. Yet she had. And scattered among the items were indications of communication between individuals' history portrayed as adversaries. Letters written across divides that officially never softened. Conversations maintained beneath public distance. It suggested that conflict, as seen from the outside, had been partly constructed, managed carefully to protect more fragile truths. Taken together, the drawer revealed a pattern. The Queen had not collected evidence to defend the crown. She had gathered fragments to defend a person. Every object redirected blame, softened narratives, or prevented a permanent fracture that might have reached beyond headlines into identity. Her reign, often described as steady, now appeared deliberate in a different way. Not preserving tradition, but absorbing consequence. The monarchy presented hierarchy. The drawer revealed loyalty. And loyalty, once hidden, reshapes every remembered decision. And once you realize who these items protected, the monarchy's modern relationships start to make unsettling sense. When the crown passed hands, thousands of pages changed authority overnight. But not the drawer. It wasn't transferred with the state papers, the jewels, or the private estates. The new monarch received keys, except one. And in royal tradition, a withheld key is not an oversight. It is a message Elizabeth intended to outlive her, and reach someone else instead. The transition had been rehearsed for decades. Procedures existed for every possibility, every ceremony, every signature required to transform a person into a sovereign. Boxes were catalogued, seals reassigned, briefings delivered in precise order. Continuity depended on it. Yet buried within those carefully ordered documents sat an absence so deliberate it almost felt louder than inclusion. Among lists detailing authority, responsibility, and privilege, one classification simply did not appear. No mention, no cross-reference, no explanation. The drawer had been removed not physically, but administratively, erased from the moment authority transferred. Legal advisors understood before anyone spoke. Instructions left behind did not forbid disclosure, but postponed it. Timing mattered more than revelation. They were told to wait, to observe, to allow certain reactions inside the family to unfold naturally before acknowledgement occurred. Elizabeth had not merely hidden an object, she had choreographed its discovery. A monarchy built on procedure suddenly found itself operating on emotion. The successor did not learn through inheritance, he learned through implication. A question asked during routine orientation met with a pause too long to ignore. Not defiance, not confusion. Recognition. Someone knew, but had been instructed not to confirm. The realization arrived gradually. There existed knowledge about the past that he, despite rank, had not been intended to receive immediately. Instead, another royal had already been prepared. Not publicly entrusted, not formally elevated, but privately briefed while Elizabeth was still alive. Conversations held quietly across years now revealed their purpose. Advice that once sounded philosophical now read like preparation. The hierarchy of bloodline remained intact outwardly, yet beneath it she had built a hierarchy of understanding. The crown would pass to one person, but comprehension would pass to another first. It was not a rejection of tradition. It was a safeguard against it. Elizabeth anticipated that authority alone could not handle what the drawer contained. Emotional stability would be required before constitutional authority could absorb the knowledge. So she separated them. Power here, awareness there, allowing time to soften impact before responsibility inherited consequence. Within the household, subtle imbalance followed. Not rebellion, not confrontation, but a quiet recalibration. Decisions felt measured differently. Certain conversations ended earlier than expected. Trust began shifting not around position, but around who knew what and when they knew it. The monarchy had always relied on unity of image. Now it faced a moment where unity depended on patience. The plan activated the moment she was gone. Not publicly, not ceremonially, but structurally. A posthumous decision influencing living relationships. And the most startling realization was not that she had kept a secret. It was that she had decided who could bear it first. Which raises the question, if the monarch wasn't meant to open it, who was? Every reign has a confidant. But Elizabeth's choice was never publicly acknowledged. Not the strongest, not the heir, not the favorite in headlines. The one she trusted was the one who understood silence. And silence is the currency of survival inside the monarchy. When that royal was privately summoned after her death, no announcement followed, but a single document changed hands. And with it, the right to open the drawer. For decades, the relationship appeared ordinary, almost forgettable in the noise of grander personalities. There were no dramatic displays of affection, no visible alliances, no strategic positioning that observers could interpret as favoritism. That was precisely why it worked. Their connection existed in absence, in the conversations that never reached press briefings, in the moments when tension rose and one figure was quietly present while others were deliberately kept away. Elizabeth never explained those meetings, and the royal in question never spoke of them. Their alignment was not political, it was emotional literacy. Where others argued position, this one understood consequence. During family crises, when statements were drafted and reactions debated, that person appeared not to advise, but to absorb. No official role required their presence, yet Elizabeth repeatedly included them in discussions that determined how the monarchy would endure personal storms. Over time, it became less a consultation and more a preparation. Years later, patterns became impossible to ignore. Private audiences granted across decades, always timed before pivotal moments. Not public ceremonies, but internal fractures, separations, disputes, reconciliations that never quite happened. The same figure attended not because of rank, but because they recognized what could not be repaired once spoken aloud. The queen did not need agreement. She needed understanding, someone capable of carrying knowledge without reacting to it. It suggested she anticipated a future where authority alone would not stabilize the family. The institution could instruct obedience, but it could not command emotional acceptance. So she cultivated a witness rather than a successor in that specific role, a guardian of context. By the time her health declined, their conversations shifted subtly. Advice became reflective. Observations became warnings. She was no longer explaining decisions. She was explaining why they had to remain misunderstood. After her passing, the summons came quietly. No council gathered, no formal handover occurred. A single envelope, prepared long before, transferred responsibility without title. Inside was not ownership but permission. Access contingent on discretion. The drawer's contents were never meant for curiosity. They were meant for interpretation. Someone she believed would read intention instead of reacting to implication. The transfer carried another purpose. Reputation survives death only if someone alive understands its burden. Elizabeth knew that history would simplify her actions into firmness or coldness. The drawer preserved nuance, and she entrusted it to the person most likely to protect that nuance after she could no longer shape events herself. Not to defend her publicly, but to prevent irreversible divisions privately. No announcement followed, because acknowledgement would defeat the design. The monarchy relies on appearance of collective continuity, yet this was a singular inheritance, knowledge detached from position. And once accepted, it altered how that royal interacted with everyone else. Words were chosen more carefully. Responses slowed. Certain arguments were never pursued again, as though unseen context restrained them. The drawer had found its reader. But understanding a secret rarely quiets it. Sometimes it amplifies the consequences already waiting beneath it. But opening it didn't bring closure. It started a chain reaction inside the palace. The drawer wasn't filled with a single secret. It was a timeline. Each object corresponded to a moment when the monarchy nearly chose one future, and Elizabeth forced another. The discovery reframed decades of decisions, marriages allowed, titles withheld, apologies never spoken. And suddenly, the crown's calm image looked less like tradition and more like careful emotional damage control orchestrated by one woman alone. The letters were arranged not by sender, but by year. When read in sequence, they aligned with events the public remembered differently. A reconciliation that appeared natural now revealed guidance behind it. A separation once blamed on incompatibility showed signs of quiet persuasion. Elizabeth had intervened not loudly, not formally, but persistently, shaping outcomes by redirecting conversations before they became irreversible declarations. The monarchy's history had not unfolded freely. It had been nudged, gently but repeatedly, toward the least destructive path. Several conflicts the world believed resolved on their own had never truly been spontaneous. The correspondence indicated conversations held late, advice offered privately, and requests framed not as orders but as understanding. She rarely prevented emotion, but she redirected its consequences. A disagreement became distance instead of rupture. Distance became duty instead of departure. Each step preserved continuity while leaving individuals to carry feelings that could never publicly surface. At the center of many entries was the same name, never written directly, but unmistakably implied through context. Over decades, the pattern showed protection. When criticism intensified, she absorbed it. When blame needed direction, she deflected it. This was not favoritism in affection. It was guardianship in responsibility. Someone within the family required shielding, and Elizabeth chose to bear the cost in perception rather than allow instability to grow around them. The unsigned legal instruction suddenly made sense in that light. She had once considered formalizing a change that would have clarified matters permanently. Yet she stopped short. A public resolution would have provided clarity, but at the expense of someone's peace. Instead, she chose ambiguity, accepting that history might judge her colder than she truly was. The drawer preserved the moment she decided misunderstanding was safer than honesty. Embedded throughout the timeline lay hints of an older regret, a tragedy that predated many of the later crises. Her reactions were not just strategic, but corrective. Decisions that appeared severe often followed echoes of earlier loss. She was not merely managing personalities, she was preventing repetition. Stability, for her, meant ensuring certain patterns never returned, even if that required personal distance others interpreted as indifference. Gradually, a larger picture formed. The monarchy's endurance had depended less on authority and more on selective sacrifice. Some reputations were protected. Others were quietly hardened to carry public disappointment. Elizabeth had distributed emotional weight unevenly so the institution could remain balanced. The drawer served as a contingency archive, a record explaining choices if they ever needed to be understood by someone capable of accepting their complexity. For those who learned its contents, past tensions inside the family gained clarity. Old resentments were no longer random. Favor seemed less like preference and more like prevention. The calm exterior of decades now appeared maintained by continuous adjustment behind closed doors, a lifetime of absorbing reaction, so the structure above would not crack. And the moment the contents became known internally, loyalties inside the family began to shift. No public statement was ever made. But from that week forward, subtle changes appeared. Seating plans, invitations, who stood beside whom. The monarchy did not fracture loudly. It rearranged itself quietly. Because once you learn which decisions were chosen for you decades ago, you begin questioning every role you inherited. The shift began in gestures too small for headlines, yet too deliberate to ignore. Conversations shortened between people who had spent years performing ease. Invitations were accepted with politeness, but without warmth. Those who once stood shoulder to shoulder found a careful space opening between them. Not hostility, but calculation. The knowledge from the drawer did not spark arguments immediately. It created hesitation. And hesitation inside a family accustomed to certainty carried weight. Old tensions suddenly had context. Coldness that once seemed personal now looked historical, rooted in decisions made long before the current generation held influence. A title that felt earned now felt assigned. A distance once interpreted as preference now resembled protection. The past had not disappeared. It had been managed. And realizing that management had shaped their lives, forced each of them to reconsider loyalty, whether it belonged to family truth or institutional survival. Some reacted with restraint, others with quiet anger. Yet none dared confront it publicly. The monarchy's greatest rule remained intact. Conflict must never outgrow the walls meant to contain it. So disagreements occurred in private corridors, in measured words and unfinished sentences, no accusations recorded, no resolutions announced. The public saw continuity, while internally relationships recalibrated around a new understanding. Elizabeth had not treated them equally because equality would have destabilized everything. Privileges took on different meanings overnight. Access granted years earlier now appeared intentional. Opportunities withheld no longer felt coincidental. Each advantage or limitation became part of a larger strategy rather than personal fortune. The realization stung not because it diminished them, but because it explained them. Identity inside the monarchy relies on inherited certainty. The drawer replaced certainty with interpretation. The Queen's legacy transformed in their perception. She remained protective, the figure who held the structure together when pressure mounted. Yet she was also revealed as a quiet manipulator of outcomes, choosing which truths could surface and which must be absorbed by individuals instead. Respect deepened and complicated at the same time. They owed stability to her restraint, yet they also carried consequences she had assigned without their knowledge. Trust reorganized accordingly. It no longer followed rank, but awareness. Those who understood the drawer spoke cautiously to each other, bound by implication rather than instruction. Those who did not sense the change without knowing its source, reacting to distance they could not explain. The monarchy, once unified by shared ignorance, now operated through uneven understanding. And with that understanding came a sobering realization. The future would not resemble the past, simply because the past had been curated. Each of them now faced a choice Elizabeth herself had managed alone, whether to preserve harmony through silence or risk honesty at the cost of fracture. The direction they chose would determine whether her lifetime of containment endured or dissolved. But Elizabeth anticipated this, and left one final instruction meant to prevent history repeating itself. At the bottom of the drawer was not a relic, but a choice, a sealed message addressed not to a person, but to the future monarch. It did not defend her actions. It explained them. Elizabeth understood the monarchy survives not by truth or lies, but by timing. And the final page wasn't a confession. It was a warning about what happens when the crown values image over understanding. The letter opened without ceremony, yet its tone carried a weight heavier than any crown. She did not write as a ruler issuing guidance, but as a predecessor admitting consequence. The first lines spoke of balance, not political balance, but human balance. The tension between preserving a symbol and preserving the people forced to live inside it. She acknowledged that the institution demands constancy, while the individuals within it remain vulnerable, and that leadership often means choosing which must bend. She explained that family cannot be governed the way a nation is governed. A country accepts clarity. A family survives through mercy. When those two principles collide, the monarch stands alone in deciding which truth to delay. Not deny, delay. Her lifetime, she implied, had been an exercise in postponement, holding certain revelations back until they could no longer wound those unprepared to carry them. There were references to earlier moments in history, not named directly, but unmistakable in meaning. Times when public honesty shattered stability, and times when secrecy allowed resentment to grow quietly beneath duty. She warned that repeating either extreme would break what she had spent decades stabilizing. The crown must never be protected at the expense of every person within it. Yet neither could every emotion be allowed to reshape the institution in real time. Survival depended on measured revelation. Her advice was precise, but never commanding. Protect individuals when exposure would define them permanently. Protect the crown when emotion threatens continuity. But never confuse the two. She admitted she had done so once. A brief line written softer than the rest, acknowledging a decision she would not undo, yet would not repeat. The regret was not dramatic. It was restrained, which made it heavier. She had accepted that some wounds could not be repaired publicly, and chose instead to contain their reach privately. Near the end, the tone shifted. No longer instruction, but something closer to appeal. She wrote that understanding must replace assumption in the next reign. That silence should serve healing, not avoidance. That authority becomes fragile when it refuses empathy. The words suggested she knew future conflicts would come, and that the reader would one day stand in the same position, forced to decide between clarity and protection. It was not an apology, yet it carried the shape of one. Not seeking absolution, but hoping comprehension would prevent resentment. The drawer, she revealed, existed not to preserve evidence, but to preserve context. Without it, her choices might appear calculated. With it, they became burdened. The inheritance she passed forward was not power, but awareness. The knowledge that leadership sometimes requires being misunderstood, so others may remain whole. The final sentence offered neither comfort nor justification, only responsibility. The next monarch would face the same dilemma: reveal everything and fracture the people, or withhold enough to keep them together. Her life had been spent navigating that line, and she left behind not a solution, but a caution. Because in the end, the secret drawer never protected the past. It was meant to protect what comes next. History will remember Elizabeth as constant, composed, immovable. But the vault reveals a different monarch, one who ruled through restraint rather than command. The greatest power she wielded wasn't the crown. It was silence. And the secret drawer proves the monarchy wasn't held together by tradition, but by one woman quietly carrying consequences no sovereign before her chose to keep. The story of her reign has always been told in images of endurance. Decades of ceremonies, speeches delivered with steadiness, continuity preserved through changing eras. Yet the drawer reframes those decades into something less visible and far heavier. She did not merely lead the institution, she absorbed its fractures. Where previous sovereigns asserted authority outwardly, she redirected pressure inward, choosing personal burden over institutional shock. Her strength was not immovability, but containment. Many moments once described as detachment now feel deliberate. The distance she maintained from conflict was not absence, but management, a way of allowing emotions to cool before they hardened into permanent division. Crises that might have erupted publicly instead dissolved quietly, because she carried the tension privately. The monarchy's survival came not from denying human weakness, but from ensuring it never reached a point where duty collapsed under it. That choice came with cost. Symbolic leadership demands perfection, yet perfection cannot coexist with full honesty. She accepted being misunderstood, so others would not be exposed. Each silence became a shield, each withheld explanation a compromise. The public saw consistency. Inside, she negotiated fragility. Over time, the role became less about representing stability and more about protecting people from the consequences of their own proximity to power. Now, those who follow inherit awareness as much as authority. The drawer removed the comfort of believing tradition alone preserves order. They know stability requires judgment, deciding when truth heals and when it harms. The responsibility she carried alone now exists collectively, and with it comes the realization that the crown is not safeguarded by ritual but by restraint practiced repeatedly across generations. The drawer itself becomes symbolic, a monarchy built on visibility, sustained by carefully chosen invisibility. A reminder that memory shapes legacy more than proclamation ever can. Within it lies proof that history is curated not only through grand acts, but through countless prevented ones. Arguments softened, revelations delayed, relationships preserved long enough to survive themselves. In public, she appeared unwavering. In private, she calculated how much honesty the institution could endure at any moment. The difference defines her legacy. Not a ruler who avoided conflict, but one who redistributed it, so it would never overwhelm the structure she promised to protect. And perhaps the greatest royal secret was never what she hid, but why she believed the crown needed hiding at all.